Hi everybody, so we're continuing on with our tour of the digestive system, and what we're going to do is we're basically going to take a superior to inferior tour of our alimentary canal and cover some accessory organs along the way. And then finally at the very end we're going to cover our two largest accessory organs, which are the liver and pancreas. So we're going to start off with the oral cavity, the first part of our alimentary canal. Oral cavity is also known as your mouth or buccal cavity. First of all, the tissue lining the oral cavity is characterized histologically as stratified, squamous epithelium. And so let's break this down. So stratified refers to the fact that these cells are stacked in multiple layers, and squamous refers to the fact that these cells are flat. And epithelium refers to the fact that these cells are in fact epithelial cells. So we have layered or stacked flat epithelial cells. And whenever we see that motif, we know that the purpose of these cells is for the protection of the underlying tissue. And we want to protect the underlying tissue from all of the environmental hazards that goes along with the oral cavity and its purpose, which is to take in food. So you're going to take in potentially hostile or caustic substances, whether it is due to their temperature or their chemical nature, and we want to protect the rest of the body from those substances. So we want to also cover some structures associated with the oral cavity. First of all, the lips and the cheeks. The lips and the cheeks work together to keep food between the teeth when we chew. And if you notice, I'm using a new stylus. What do you call it? I'm trying to think. I'm losing the right words for what you call it. I can't think of it. What do you call it when you deal with the size of the pencil tip that you're using? Anyway, so I'll just call it a pencil tip. So I'm using a thinner pencil tip. So hopefully this allows you to be able to distinguish between my words, or distinguish between the letters of my words a little bit more easily. Again, if you're having a hard time recognizing my handwriting from this tutorial, and again, it's because I'm using an Apple pen, I'm not using an actual pen here, so the interface between the pen and the iPad is kind of slippery, and so I just can't get the traction that I need to be able to write like I normally do. So if you'd rather see the better handwriting, then just go to the notes that are scanned online and you'll be able to see all of these same notes for you. All right, everything is practically the same as I am writing them out here for these tutorials. But anyways, getting back to the lips and the lips and the cheeks also work together to assist in speech formation. So the palate, otherwise known as the roof of the mouth, separates the oral cavity from the nasal cavity, and we already talked about that when we talked about the respiratory system. And the palate can be broken up into two different components. The more anterior component is known as the hard palate, composed of the palatine process of the maxilla and the palatine bones. And then the most posterior part of the palate is the soft palate. And the most posterior tapered aspect of the posterior, or rather the soft palate, is called the uvula. So we're going to say including the uvula. And by the way, the uvula, you guys know what the uvula is. Uvula is this mucosa-bound pendulous tab that hangs down in the back of our oral cavity. You can see it when you ask someone to open up their mouth and say, ah. So the purpose of the uvula, in fact, is that it closes off the nasopharynx. You guys know what the nasopharynx is now from the respiratory lectures. Closes off the nasopharynx when we swallow. So basically what it does is it retracts and elevates to close off that opening between your oropharynx and your nasopharynx so food doesn't regurgitate up into your nasopharynx and nasal cavity. All right. So, I'm sorry, I flipped around because I flipped around the iPad. Try to prevent that in the future. Moving on, the tongue. Also, this very large, inconspicuous muscular structure in the middle of your oral cavity. More specifically, it is attached to the floor of the mouth. And the tongue is involved with swallowing, speech. It helps to reposition food between the teeth. It is the place in which our taste buds are located. Taste buds allow us to sense our four primary raw tastes, including sweet and sour. And then it also involved with mixing, so it mixes food with saliva to create this ball of food known as a bolus of food. All right, so now I want to talk about the accessory organs associated with the oral cavity. Are three sets of salivary glands. So the salivary glands, as the name suggests, produce saliva. So first we're going to talk about the parotid glands. So they lay anterior to the ears. They secrete saliva into ducts that open up near our second molar. So we have these tabs of mucosa that kind of project medially from the lateral walls of our oral cavity, just underlying where our cheeks are. This mucosa, by the way, is known as your buccal mucosa. And it's right behind these tabs of mucosa that you have the outlets of these ducts. They're called Wharton's ducts. That's their anatomical name. And they're very large ducts, easily observed in cadavers when you do cadaver dissections. And so the saliva secreted from these glands just secretes right into the oral cavities just behind these tabs of mucosa through these Wharton's ducts. You also have the submandibular glands. And they lay along the medial aspect of the mandibular body. Right? Mandible is your jawbone, right? And they secrete saliva into ducts that open up on either side of your lingual frenulum. These ducts are called Sprinson's ducts, by the way. And you don't have to know the names of the ducts. If it's not written in the notes, you won't be held accountable for it. And the frenulum, by the way, is this median fold of mucosa in the floor of the mouth that secures the tongue. By the way, when you're reading, have you ever noticed this? When you have your mouth open, sometimes you'll all of a sudden see this little spritz of fluid kind of project out of your mouth and onto the page. That's due to the activity of your Sprinson ducts, basically squeezing and propelling that saliva being secreted from your submandibular glands. Now you also have sublingual glands. And as the name suggests, sub means below, right? And then lingual means tongue. These are actually under the tongue, and they secrete saliva into ducts that open up onto the floor of your mouth. So what is saliva for? So saliva both lubricates and then dissolves and chemically breaks down food. And I just wanted to use this space here to just lay down some more facts about saliva. We have increased saliva production. When food enters the oral cavity or associated with the site or smell of food, right? We produce about 1 to 1.5 liters of saliva per day. Kind of gross, actually, huh? Right? The saliva is about 97 to 99.5% water, about 0.5% mucus, so it is a little bit viscous, and then also contains an enzyme called lysozyme, which is bacteriolytic, which means it breaks down bacteria. It embeds itself in bacterial cell walls and breaks apart the bacteria. You also have large amounts of IgA antibodies. So you have all different types of antibodies, and you'll learn more about that in microbiology: IgG, IgE, IgM, and IgA. IgA happens to be the type of antibody you see expelled from your body as part of your secretions. And again, just like the lysozyme, the antibodies are there to be able to help launch an immune response against various types of pathogens which may be a threat against the body. So you also have an enzyme secreted in your saliva known as, I'm just going to put this, also contains, known as salivary amylase. So it also contains salivary amylase, and you're going to talk more about salivary amylase in lab. It also contains an enzyme known as lingual lipase. So salivary amylase and lingual lipase. And you're going to talk more about those enzymes in your GI physiology laboratory. So now let's talk about the teeth. Teeth are for chewing, otherwise known as mastication. As a result of mastication, what you have is this nice, soft, homogenized ball of food known as a bolus, soft, flexible mass that's ideal for swallowing. Kind of have to go over the big overview of our various types of teeth. And so we want to start with our deciduous teeth or milk teeth. These are the teeth that we have during childhood. And what I like to do is I like to just draw out the teeth because, again, this kind of shows you that the best way to study biology is to just force yourself to draw things out. Biology is highly visual spatial. And while I know some people are just better at auditory learning or using other methods of learning, kinesthetic learning, you can't get around the visual spatial learning. At some point in time, you just got to force yourself to learn in this way, and the best way to learn in this way is to just draw things out. So we're going to draw some teeth together. We're going to start with the deciduous teeth. Why is my pencil not working? There we go. So what I'm drawing for you right here is just one row of teeth attached to one jaw. And it's going to be the same for both the upper and lower jaws. Now, the shapes of the teeth might be a little bit different for the upper versus the lower jaw, and the distribution of the teeth may be a little bit different from the upper versus the lower jaw, but the actual teeth, the order in which they occur and their numbers are going to be the same. So we're just drawing one row of teeth attached to one jaw, either the upper jaw or the lower jaw, it doesn't matter, you pick. So we're going to start with the most medial aspect of this row of teeth. And in our deciduous teeth, as is the case with our permanent teeth, we have 4 of these most medial teeth, which we know as our incisors. And then lateral to the incisors, we're just going to have one canine, otherwise known as cuspid tooth, on each side. So here we have a cuspid or canine tooth. And then over here we have a another cuspid or canine tooth. And then lateral to these cuspids on either side, we have 2 molars. So I'm going to draw these little X's in the center of the molars because they have these indentations that allow them to grind the food a little bit more effectively. So here we have 2 molars on this side, and then 2 molars on the other side. So if we count them up, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And so remember, we have the same number of teeth, same types of teeth in the same order on the upper jaw as well. So that gives us a grand total of 20 deciduous teeth. Now I'm going to draw the permanent teeth for you. So again, we're just going to stick with one jaw. The jaw is going to be larger to accommodate more teeth. So again, we're just drawing another single row of teeth, but in this case, the permanent teeth of an adult. So most medially, we have our 4 incisors. And then lateral to that, we are going to have the cuspids or canines. So here's a cuspid and here's a cuspid. Actually, accidentally wrote S instead of C there. And then lateral to that, we're going to have 2 bicuspids on either side. So this is a new type of tooth that you don't see as part of your deciduous teeth. I almost said you don't see in childhood because obviously you do have the permanent teeth in childhood. It's just that during childhood you start with your deciduous teeth, and then as you lose those deciduous teeth, they are replaced with your permanent teeth, which you keep for the rest of your life. So again, we have these bicuspid teeth, 2 of them on either side, lateral to the cuspids. And then lateral to the bicuspids, on either side, we have 3 molars instead of 2. So we're going to draw in our box-like molars with the X's through them. All right, so we have a grand total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. And of course, this is just one row of teeth associated with one jaw, and so on the other jaw, on the other row of teeth, you're going to have another 16 teeth for a grand total of 32. All right. Okay, so now we want to talk about some tooth anatomy, and I think this is where I'm going to call it with this particular note series. Yeah, and then we'll go and we'll talk about the pharynx and the esophagus from there. It's just that these teeth, it's a lot of territory, so I think we'll just take a rest after we get through this. So what I want to do here is I want to go over these structures on our diagram first, and then we'll refer back to their purposes. So I'm just going to diagram this for you or fill in the leader lines. So the outer portion of the tooth that you can see is known as the crown. And the outer portion of the crown is made up of this material known as enamel. This is the stuff that makes our teeth white. The really tough stuff that has almost like a porcelain-like texture and hardness to it. Then the ultrastructure of the tooth is actually reinforced and composed of this compound known as dentin. And the dentin is this material that's more shaded or speckled. Right, so all of these little dots throughout this diagram here represents the dentin of the tooth. It's just basically responsible for the ultrastructure of the tooth. Now, the dentin actually extends inferior to the crown into the part of the tooth that's actually located, embedded within the jaw, within and below the gum line, and that is the root of the tooth. So number 4 here is going to be the root of the tooth. So this is the part of the tooth that you can't see, the part of the tooth that's embedded within the jaw and within the gums or gingiva. Speaking of the gums or gingiva, number 7 represents the gingiva. This is the pink stuff, the pink mucosa that surrounds our teeth and coats our jaws. At the very center of the root of the tooth, right, at the deepest part of the root of the tooth that's completely enclosed by the dentin, we have the pulp cavity. And the pulp cavity is continuous with the root canals. Also at the deepest component of the root of the tooth. Now, the entire root of the tooth is surrounded by this connective tissue known as the cementum. And I think I'm going to change the colors here. Let me see. So, and I'm going to use green just because it contrasts well with the red. So I'm going to highlight the cementum for you in green. It's just represented by this very, very thin strip. This is the cementum. So it completely surrounds the root of the tooth. And then the root of the tooth actually anchors the tooth to the surrounding jawbone. And the jawbone, by the way, let me use a different color here. The jawbone, actually, you know what? I'm going to try the highlighter. Maybe the highlighter will work. Maybe the highlighter only works with text. Maybe that's the issue. Well, let me try the marker. Maybe the marker will be better. I just want to use something that maybe I'll really expand the caliber. It's the best word I can think of the stylus to be able to do this a little bit faster. So, oh yeah, this is perfect. So what I'm doing, oh, and you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make it, look at this, I can make it transparent. So let's do that. I'll erase that. And we'll go and we'll fill this in. Yeah, so that's good. See, so this is kind of like making it into a highlighter where I've made it kind of transparent. So now I'm highlighting the bone, right? This is the bone of our mandible or our maxillae, depending on what jaw we're talking about, our upper or lower jaw. And so the cementum basically is annealed to the periodontal ligament, which then anchors the entire tooth or helps embed the tooth within the jawbone. So now what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to highlight the periodontal ligament with a different color here. Let's do purple. That contrasts well with the green and the yellow. So right here where I'm drawing with the purple, we have our periodontal ligament, which is actually going to join the cementum to the underlying bone. And that's not a term that we have here attached with a leader line, but if you guys are reading the book, then you're going to see that term used. Periodontal ligament. All right. So do we have any other leader lines to fill in? I guess not. I guess that's it. So anyway, so I just wanted to give you that big picture visual spatial overview. Go back to red and make sure that we're using the same Stylus tip size. The problem is like I said, see these lines I'm drawing here? This is because the computer thinks that my finger is the stylus. There. I have to like basically touch the pad with my palm in order to move it now so it doesn't get confused. These things, oh, it's just... These things are not perfect. So maybe if I turn off the stylus, put it on eraser. There, okay. So I guess I have to make like little brisk movements in order for it to move and not think that my finger is the stylus. Okay, so back to where we were before. So number one, we're going back to the crown. Now you know what the crown looks like. Number one is the crown. The crown is just the area of the tooth that's above the gingiva, or gum line, if you will. The outermost component of the crown is made up of enamel. It's this brittle ceramic-like material, hardest substance in the body. It's heavily mineralized with calcium salts. It's made up of the calcium salt known as hydroxyapatite, which is the same stuff that makes up the matrix of bone. It's really, really tough stuff, but it's even more dense than bone. It bears the force of chewing. The cells producing enamel degenerate when the tooth actually erupts. That means when it comes out, so you can see it, and the enamel will not heal itself. So basically what you're born with is what you get. And then here we just have a little blurb on dentin. Dentin is this protein-rich bone-like material that acts as a shock absorber. It also not only reinforces the crown, but penetrates to form the ultrastructure of the root, or I should say it penetrates inferiorly to the crown to form the ultrastructure of the root. The cell that actually creates the dentin is called an odontoblast, and it basically spends its whole life secreting the proteinaceous material that makes up the dentin, and then also maintaining that dentin. The pulp cavity is this connective tissue cavity that's deep to the dentin, mainly within the root of the tooth. You also have lots of blood vessels and nerve fibers within the pulp cavity. So it helps supply nutrients to the tooth, and then also is the source of tooth sensation. Then let's talk about the root of the tooth. So the root is the area embedded within the jawbone. It's completely outlined by cementum. Cementum is just the calcified connective tissue that covers the outer surface of the root, and then attaches the root to the very thin periodontal ligament, which I drew in for you with purple marker color, and that helps attach ultimately the tooth to the surrounding jawbone. The root canal is just the extension of the pulp cavity down into the root. So just a quick note on dental caries, otherwise known as cavities. This is due to dental plaque or biofilm buildup. Basically, you have bacteria living on your teeth, and they create this sugar-based amalgam like material that coats your teeth and is very hard to get off. That's why we have to go to see the dental hygienist rather, every 6 months to be able to get that biofilm scraped off the enamel of our teeth. The problem is that as more and more dental plaque accumulates, it can actually pry the seal between the gingiva and the tooth, allowing bacteria in the oral cavity to get down into the cementum and periodontal ligament. When that happens, we get what is known as periodontal disease. And a periodontal disease is accountable to about 80 to 90% of tooth loss. Again, that's why we see the dental hygienist every 6 months. That's why it's very important to do that, is to prevent that underlying periodontal disease from developing, because once it develops, there's really not much you can do as far as preserving that tooth. I mean, there are alternatives, but they are very, very expensive and uncomfortable. All right, so the goal is to try to preserve what you have, and that means going to see the dental hygienist every 6 months, and then of course flossing and brushing your teeth twice a day and all that kind of stuff. We all know that's important. All right, so that's it for this lecture. I'm gonna pick up on the pharynx and the esophagus next time we get together. and we'll just keep on working our way down the old alimentary canal. All right, I will see you soon.